Today we are speaking about Parsha Korach. Now, this was about a rebellion that Moses' cousin Korach made. He was a Levi with a high position, and the Levite family, part of whom became Kohanim, the high priest, and the priest that came from Aaron, they were given very special tasks because of how they behaved and what they did and their trustworthiness. And God chose them in a special way to be the priests among the priests, because the Jewish people are a priestly people. And Moshe's cousin Korach, even with his high position as a leader, really resented that his cousins Aaron and Moses had higher positions than him. And his mentality in a certain way was a mentality of jealousy. It's not fair. And today we're not going to speak about Korach so much, but about these mentalities. And so in jealousy, what he did was he rebelled, and he caused other people to rebel with him to pull the leaders down, actually in the hopes that he would become the leader himself. So there is a certain dishonesty in this. He said everybody has to be equal, but even when everybody's equal, they still have to be leaders, and it was going to be him and not his cousins. So we see that jealousy distracts a person from doing what they have to be doing. In other words, everyone has been placed in the world for a purpose. And if we are not looking at our purpose, but we're looking at other people and we're saying, why are they doing that? I should be doing that. Then what happens is that focus makes us unable to focus on what we're supposed to be doing. And this is what was happening. So instead of being grateful for his position and his wealth, instead of doing what he could accomplish, the good that he could do in the world, he focused on what he felt was lacking. Now, this is something that we see does happen in the world, where people are so focusing on what they themselves don't have, or what they feel they don't have, or what they feel someone else has, that it makes it hard for them to do what they are in the world to do. So what he did was he convinced other people that it was unfair, it's not fair victim kind of mentality. Even though he had a high position and wealth, nevertheless, he couldn't focus on that. He just chose in a certain way to focus on his feelings of hurt. And this happens very often, that people feel insulted or attacked or not enough. And that creates real problems, because their passions go on to feeling offended and lead to anger. And the truth is that everybody has vulnerabilities and places where they wish they were in a different position or had something more. I mean, there are things that everybody would like to have or don't have or wish they had. And sometimes it's something that somebody can do something about, in which case it's a good idea to do that instead of feeling hurt and angry about what they feel that they're lacking. So when this kind of sense comes, then people could feel very intense emotions. Now, there's a very popular word these days, triggered. I was triggered. Now, what that means is that people allow their own reactions to take over, and somebody said something, or they notice that somebody else has something that they wish that they had. And then the result of it is that they go into an emotional state where they feel like victims, and they don't control it. They find it hard to control. Now, you have to be careful about these things. And the fact is that somebody says something that you don't like. What happens very often is the person feels triggered. They lash out. They insulted the person who they feel insulted them. But the interesting part of this is, and we see it very clearly in the case of Korach, that the trigger that's experienced feels automatic to them. In other words, when somebody says something that refers to something they're missing or something they don't have, or it feels like a criticism, then they experience it as automatic. You said that. How could you say that? Why did you say that? You know that you shouldn't have said that. That triggers me. That's something that's spoken about a lot. But when you look at it, this is something that we're not supposed to walk around with. We're not supposed to walk around with automatic triggers or what some people call button. You push my button. Not supposed to walk around with triggers to be pulled by other people, God forbid, or buttons that are pushed that make people feel hurt or that they feel hurt about. Nothing makes anybody anything. You don't make somebody hurt. So here again, how do we handle this? And what are the ways to handle these things? We have to understand that we are who we are and we're in the world for a purpose. And we're okay. There's nothing wrong with us. We are the way that we're meant to be. If we have things to work on, it's up to us to work on those things. But if somebody is unkind to somebody else, which they should not be, but when someone feels they have been treated unkindly, very often what happens is that they feel that there's something wrong with them. Otherwise, that person would not have said that. And then they so what are the choices? One choice is to go with that pain and either act out with anger toward that person, or they can take that anger in and they can wonder about what's lacking in themselves. But somehow we have to get over the automatic reaction that causes these kind of situations that would cause more pain and anguish. So what do we do when we don't know how to control these situations? But this is something that the Torah wants from us. Now, we've spoken about it many times, that Viktor Frankl speaks about the something between two nothings. So something happens, you hear about something that reminds you of what you wish you had, or somebody says something that you experience as unkind. And there's the whatever happens. And then there is after that either a response, or either we act out, or which is like reacting. We react to what happened or what the person said, or we respond, or we don't really feel we need to say anything at all. And what makes that possible, one thing that makes that possible, is the moment in between what happens and how we respond. That we need to leave a moment. Somebody says something, or a person could have a moment where they feel jealous, where they feel like, I wish I had that, or I need that, or how do I get that? And in that moment, they can either say whatever they're going to say that's going to calm them. In other words, I'm happy for her that she has that. Or there is something I can do to develop this in myself. Or divine providence. And then there doesn't have to be a reaction. Since the Torah wants this from us, to work this out so that we don't react with triggers and buttons and automatic jealousy, The Torah is teaching us how to think and have overview in ways that guide us to respond rather than to react. So when we take that moment, we have a moment to not react to a button or a trigger, but just to be calm. What's very interesting in this Parsha is that the person who really was attacked was Moses. Moses and Aaron were attacked by Korach. Korach said it's not fair. They grabbed the power. Who do they think they are? It's not fair. I should be having this. They shouldn't be having this. And they actually were so aggressive that they gathered people together to make an actual rebellion, not just in words. So what we're going to learn in this Parsha, instead of focusing on Korach, as we sometimes do when we speak about this Parsha, we're going to focus on Moses, on Moshe. How did he handle this? How did he manage to keep his equanimity when Korach insulted him? And insulted him and Aaron in front of the entire community, accusing them of having grabbed the power. So when we see how Moses handled this, we learn from this for ourselves what we can do. Because they actually, Moshe had an attitude, a perspective that is what allowed him to handle this. And we're going to look at two ways in which Moshe was able to handle this situation with inner discipline. Now, this is not unusual. Leaders are often criticized by people who libel them, say what they're doing is wrong. I mean, the Rambam, Maimonides, was criticized very much. Many, many people. The Baal Shem Tov was criticized, but anyway. People who were leaders and innovators were tremendously criticized. And Moses wasn't different in this way. Now, two of the people that Korach brought together were Datan and Abiram. And they were people who had been major detractors of Moshe from the beginning. These two men went against Moshe for the whole time. We know that Moses grew up in the palace of the Pharaoh in Egypt when the people were just before the slavery, as the slavery was beginning. And these two Jews, Datan and Abiram, saw Moshe, and Moshe went out and started to protect Jews from Egyptian aggressors who were beating somebody up, and he went out there to help save them. And what did these two people do? They betrayed him to the king, which forced Moses to run away from Egypt. So these same two people came out of Egypt, were in the desert, and then when Moshe introduced the heavenly manna to Israelites in the desert, these two men stirred up trouble by challenging the rules under which the manna was to be offered. Moshe gave instructions that the manna has to be eaten on the day that it was collected. And Datan and Abiram challenged Moshe and deliberately left some manna for the next day. Like, let's see what's going to happen. So we see really their rebellion is against God, because these are God's rules. And what happened was what they left over till the next day became putrid, because God wanted the manna to be collected by everybody each day. And on Friday, enough for 2 days, enough for Friday and Shabbat. But Datan and Abiram somehow, every time there was an opportunity to challenge Moshe's authority, they did it. So when they joined Korach and led people to go against Moses, that did not stop Moses from wanting to save their lives by trying to convince them to change their positions. So we see that from that alone, we could see that Moshe did not feel personally challenged by Datan and Aviram when everything they did was against God and against Moshe. Now, he looked at them, I guess, as, rebellious boys. They were men, but he didn't take it personally. He didn't do that. And so Moshe, in humility and self-discipline, invited Datan and Aviram to dialogue with him. Let's talk about what's going on. What Korach is doing isn't right. This is not what's going on. This is not what's happening. If you understand it differently, maybe you'll handle it differently. Now, the fact that Moshe could say that to people who were enemies and kept acting against him is amazing. So when they mocked him and refused his invitation because they didn't want to dialogue with him, because they just wanted to embarrass him and pull him down, Moshe did not take offense. When he saw they would not come to him, when he sent a message, come and dialogue, what did he do? He humbly went to them. He went to their tent and said, let's talk. And they refused. They refused. So, but we see that Moshe kept trying to improve the situation and make a good relationship and try to help them understand, but they didn't want to. So he could have ignored them or pushed them out, but that's not what he did. Okay, we see how he behaved, but let's try to understand where Moses was coming from in how he handled this. How was it that he was able to go forward without being angry or without insulting them back or without feeling, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong? None of those things. Now, I have to mention that Moshe did ask God to show the people who was right in this. In other words, he did what he needed to do as the leader of the Jewish people. He did say to God, you need to show them who's right here, who you want, who you are choosing, and in a way that everybody sees it, and in an unusual way, so that everybody should get the message. But that's for another class, another time. But what he did here was, even though he asked God, show the people, he did not do it out of anger. In other words, he was able to keep his leadership position, but he didn't do anything out of anger, which is really, really important and very inspiring. So how did he manage to have that kind of inner discipline? What prevented him from getting angry? How did he manage to keep his ego in check and live with this kind of self-effacement? So understanding Moshe's perspective is going to really help us. Moshe had a perspective he lived with in his interactions with other people. And our sages equated anger with the cardinal sin of idolatry. We need to understand this. Anger is like idolatry. So that makes us really say, I don't want to get angry again because I don't want to do idolatry. I certainly don't want to do idolatry. So why is it okay to get angry? It's not. But in understanding how Moshe helped this, in understanding Moshe's principles, we can understand what can help us not to feel jealous or angry or less than. So Moshe reflected on this, that if the sin of anger is so serious that it could be equated with idolatry, and if we're required to sacrifice our lives to avoid idol worship, then we're clearly required to rein in our ego and control our tempers to avoid anger. So first of all, what's the connection between anger and idolatry? Divine providence that God is involved in everything in our lives, in everything that happens. Nothing happens without God's involvement. So divine providence means God is with me. God is giving me what he's giving me. Of course, I have free will and I should do my part to do better and give more and develop more. But everything in my life is from God. So divine providence is a cardinal principle in our faith. And we believe in a personal God who guides the universe and who is intimately engaged in every facet of our lives. So that means that God is here. He knows if we're happy or sad, healthy or the opposite, wealthy or the opposite. He not only knows it, but actually orchestrates it. So a person wouldn't be poor if God didn't will it. And I just have to say that the Torah speaks about helping the poor, helping people through tzedakah, which in English is charity, even though that's not enough of a translation, or of helping somebody to be able to go into business or get a job, to be able to fend for themselves. And God wants that there are people who will be supportive of other people. And also people who are wealthy, people wouldn't be wealthy if God didn't want that. So the doctrine of divine providence is clear that God is the root cause of all the details of our lives, even the insignificant ones. Everything is according to his grand design. Nothing is coincidental. I had an experience with this, that somebody who now lives in Israel was going through his old pictures, and he found a picture of me with his wife. This picture is from the 70s, late 70s, and he sent this picture on Facebook to our son and said, your wife had a lot to do with my wife's process, and he wrote some very nice things and sent this picture. And our son put it on the family chat. And I looked at that picture and I said, oh my gosh, here we are. Isn't that beautiful? And I had bumped into her 2 years earlier. So I had her phone number. So it occurred to me, what divine providence. This morning I saw that she was actually a roommate and friend, popped up in my present life right now. And I have her phone number. So I sent her a WhatsApp and said, let's get together at the next opportunity. Now, why? I don't know why this happened, because the message that I'm trying to share is that everything works in according with divine providence, with God's grand design, and nothing is coincidental. So when we look at life this way, out comes this old photograph, out comes, the husband saying that how connected we were and what a difference it made. And then I have her phone number and okay, let's see where this goes, because God is putting this together. So we have to know that, and that God determines the small and the large in our lives. We meet people that God wants us to meet. What if we want to make a reservation for a flight out of town? There is or is not a seat available on the plane. The flight goes on time or it's canceled. We go on the flight and sit next to somebody who we have an interesting conversation with. And every detail is part of God's divine providence. We don't know the reason for this because this is above reason, but every event involves a deliberate decision on the part of the Creator, because every decision affects the overall scheme of history and even creation. That's huge. God chose to bring us into the world in a certain time, in a certain place, with certain parents, with certain situations. Why? I don't know. But that is a deliberate decision. Sometimes people become better through situations that they would not have chosen, or they understand things in the way that they would never have met up with, except that they were born in that situation, in that time, in that family, in that place. So if I accept that every occurrence is deliberately planned and executed by God, then it's like there's no difference between which flight I can book or whether there'll be traffic on the way to the airport. Yes, it's our job to do the best we can to be on time. That's our job. And we have to work on it if we need to work on it, or all the other things we need to work on this. But all that, sometimes you come late and the plane didn't take off because you find out that it was postponed another hour. Or sometimes you arrive early and find out there was a mechanical difficulty and it's not going to be fixed for another hour either. So none of this could happen if God had not willed it. And if he willed it, who am I to object or take offense? Now, again, that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to work on ourselves and improve things. We are. We are meant to use our free will to take the opportunities God is giving us. But we have free choice. But when the driver in front of us is driving too slowly, or the line at the airport is slow, when people are taking their time to ask a lot of questions, how are we supposed to look at this? Or if somebody was annoyed and angrily bumped into me stepping on my toe, that doesn't happen. Didn't the person who hurt me choose to hurt me? They didn't care. They just, been in a moment of anger. So that could happen. Did God force him to slight me or behave badly? Isn't he accountable for his actions? Did God force him to hurt me? So our fellow man who behaved that way was not forced to hurt you. He chose to hurt you. He chose to be careless and step on your foot. He did. That's his. But if he wouldn't have succeeded if God had not first determined, for some reason, not necessarily related to you, but related to the divine master plan linked to the cosmos and creation, that you were meant to have your toe stubbed that day. So your fellow did not have to be the person fulfilling God's plan. In other words, it's God's plan that allows this to happen, because that's something God put into creation for a reason. Sometimes when somebody's toe is stepped on, at the wedding, this little boy kept stepping on my toe. And it was interesting because, and he didn't care either.
Spicy.
But I realized that there was something going on with him.
This one?
And I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything about it. I just didn't take it personally. I realized, his mother will help him grow, but it wasn't up to me and I didn't have to take it personally. So when the person does what he does, so it was his choice to the extent that he had choice, this little guy. But he didn't have to be, or a person who does what he does doesn't have to be the person who's fulfilling God's plan. The person doesn't have to be the one who's careless or not thoughtful. His choice to hurt you, like Korach's choice, was sinful, and for that he has to offer an accounting before God. But that's between him and God. It's not your affair or your concern. And you have no cause to be upset with him over that. Your concern is that you were hurt today. So to take care of yourself and feel that, and maybe move your foot away so your toe doesn't get stepped on again for the third or fourth time. So that's yours. But you don't have to blame your fellow. In a certain sense, we have to understand if there's anyone who has to be the source of this, it's God. So if you blame your fellow and you get angry with him, you are denying the divine origin of your pain. In other words, God wanted this to happen. That person chose to be the person who did what he did, which he didn't have to be that person. But God, this comes from God. So if you blame your fellow and grow angry with him, you're denying the divine origin of your pain, and you're banishing God from this situation and declaring that he had no hand in it. We believe that God is omnipresent and can't be banished from any time or space. So when we say God wasn't here, God isn't here, whatever happened, that is heresy. It's like idolatry, which is why our sages equated the two. Sometimes things happen that are not good, and those people get punished one way or another. That's God's business, how he's going to handle that. But our job is to stay connected in God, recognize God is here with me, and what is it that I am to do? What is my attitude to be? And when we recognize that everything is coming from God, maybe through somebody else, but it's coming from God, then we don't want to do this idolatry. We want to recognize that God is here and his divine providence is what's bringing me into this situation. And this is why Moses never became angry over Datan and Aviram's insolence and chutzpah, because he knew that this was coming from God. Moses was weighed down by Korach's rebellion and by those who were going against God, but he took comfort in the knowledge that his distress served a heavenly cause by being part of the divine plan. In other words, he felt these people are going against God. Who am I? It actually says it. V'nachnu ma. What am I? What are we? What are we? It's not about us. You're angry at God. And that helps to know that. So Datan and Aviram, with all their insolence, Moses never took that personally. That was between them and God. By recognizing that the people's rebellious behavior was part of God's plan, Moses' attitude was one of equanimity. Korach had a choice. He could have recognized that everything is coming from God, that my position, which was a high position, my blessings are all coming from God. And why did God choose me to have this position and Moses to have that position? I don't know that. But I have to trust that this comes from God and that I need to do what I am here to do. And Moses needs to understand that this rebellion, even though Korach shouldn't have done it, Dasan and Aviram shouldn't have done it, the people who did it should not have done it. And Moshe tried to convince them not to do it. Don't rebel against God. He did his best, but when they refused, Moshe's attitude was equanimity. Whatever God sent was meant to be. So Moshe did what he could to help them, but after that, he didn't take it personally. He didn't take it personally that Dathan and Aviram didn't want to talk to him, that he couldn't help them. Sometimes we want to help people to grow, and they don't want to. And he really did his best. And then he had to let go, let God, give it over to God. So he knew that the result was up to God. For them, Moshe felt compassion, that they couldn't get themselves past that stuck place where they were. And Moshe was able to keep his inner peace because he knew, again, that everything comes from God. He did his part, but there was nothing else he could do. Yet, when Korach accused Moses and Aaron of grabbing the power of leadership, that was distressing to Moshe, because it was like, me? So let's understand how he handled this. How did Moshe handle this attack? Moshe's response was, you and your group are complaining against God. And what is Aaron that you should complain against him? What did Moshe mean? Why shouldn't Korach complain against Aaron? Aaron filled the position of high priest that Korach wanted. Korach, it seemed, had no issue with God. He was jealous of Aaron, the high priest. But how did it become that Aaron was the high priest? Because God gave him this position. So Moshe obviously meant to say that Aaron didn't assume the high priesthood on his own, but was appointed by God. But this is similar to what Moshe told those who complained to him that they wanted different food. When the people were given manna, they said they wanted meat. Now we know that the manna tasted like anything you wanted it to taste like. So, okay, you want a hamburger, so make it taste like a hamburger. So what were they doing? They were just complaining against God. But when they complained to Moshe and to Aaron. And they said, V'nachnu ma. What is it that we're nothing. Who are we? So we have to understand this, who are we? God directs all matters, not me. If you want manna, complain to God. If you want to be high priest, complain to God. But the answer is still unclear. It seems that Moshe he agreed with Korach's complaint that he could have had the position of the high priest, but that's what he wanted. But he could have said to God, I would like to be the high priest. What would God answer? What is going on here? God would say, this is what I have chosen. This is what I decided. But why didn't Moshe defend his brother as the best candidate for the position? He didn't say, look, Aaron is really good at this. Because Aaron did this, and I could tell you right now a few reasons that he could have said, well, Aaron is the right person for the job. But he didn't say that. Essentially, he told Korach, it's also important, Aaron wasn't appointed on merit. He just was the person that God chose. God made his choice. Either of you could have been high priest, but God chose Aaron. It's very interesting. He didn't feel that he had to reason with this, because this is beyond reason. That God chose Moshe for his position, Aaron for his position. That's not something that we learn about it. I mean, you could talk at great length about why and how and what did Aaron do and what did Moshe do that made them the right people for the job. But that's not what it really is. What it really is, that God's choice is something beyond reason, that God knows why he places somebody in a position to be able to do something. Now, did Moshe really feel that Korach, who would later be punished by God for this rebellion, was as worthy as Aaron to have the position of high priest? That is a really wonderful question. Did Moshe really feel that Korach or Aaron could either have been the high priest? And the answer is yes, he thought that. Moshe believed that anyone could have had the position that he or his brother had. Anyone. So why didn't he justify his position or Aaron's position? Moshe was the humblest man on the face of the earth. That's what it says in the Torah. Yet he knew his own qualities. How could that be? He was both the humblest person and he knew his own qualities. He was the redeemer of Israel, the greatest prophet who ever lived. He knew he was the greatest Jew in history because God gave him this position. He had the highest prophecy that anyone would ever have at any time. There's a lot of talk about that in the Torah and how God explains it. Actually, in the last week's Parsha, God explains what that different prophecy is. But if he knew this, if Moshe knew that he was the greatest Jew in history, how could he be so humble? So Moshe was humble, although he had achieved great actions, saving the Jews again. So how did he manage to maintain a humble image of himself, even while he acknowledged his amazing qualities and achievements, including his own humility? He knew that he had these qualities. How could he be considered humble while he knew his great qualities? And the answer for that is he never took credit for his wonderful qualities. He didn't say, I'm great. He always attributed the credit to God. So when we accomplish something amazing, it's really that God is doing it through us. And Moshe saw himself as God's tool for accomplishment. He was full of talents and spirit that God used to perform miracles and deliver the Torah. So when Moshe received a compliment, he knew inwardly that he didn't deserve it. He knew that if he didn't have the talents given to him by God, Moshe knew he would have been unable to accomplish anything. So credit has to be given to God. And he knew that. He gave the credit to God who placed these talents into him. It's an amazing, amazing thought for everyone to have, that God is giving us everything that we have. Yes, it's our job to work with it. Moshe worked many times to save the Jewish people when they were not acting as they should have.
How are you? Is the salmon ready?
But he knew that God would listen to him. Why? Because God gave him that gift, that he could speak directly to God. And he knew that he could give the credit to God for whatever he accomplished. So he saved their lives, the lives of the people, but it was really God who gave him the opportunity to do that. Further than that, knowing that all the credit goes to God, Moshe supposed that if anyone else were given the same set of talents, he could possibly have accomplished even more than Moshe did.
All week next week.
And since this was possible, Moshe gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. So he knew, I've done amazing things. Really, I'm God's tool to do amazing things. If somebody else would have been used as a tool, they probably would have done better than me, because we know our own faults. That gave him the ability to look at the good in other people and not to say, I'm better than them. Look what I accomplished. No, never to say that, but to say, I'm doing the best I can. I know I need to work on myself to do better. But
did you slide it?
Thank you, God, for giving me the opportunities you're giving me. And that's how you stay humble. And then when we do something good, Baruch Hashem, thank you for giving me that opportunity, that you worked through me to allow something to take place. And this is how Moshe was able to remain humble, even as he accomplished monumental things. Moshe knew his brother, and he knew Aaron saw life the same way. Aaron didn't take credit for the high priesthood. He saw himself merely as God's choice, and God could have chosen anyone. Aaron knew he was well suited for the position, but he was suited to the position only because of the spiritual gifts that God had given him. So knowing that you're like the tool in the hands of a sculptor, you don't take credit for yourself, because it's the sculptor that is making the statue, not the tool. You do it through the tool. And this is what Moshe meant when he said, your complaint is not with Aaron, but with God. Moshe was not implying that Korach was as worthy as Aaron. On the contrary, God selected Aaron because Aaron was the best candidate for the high priesthood. But Korach wanted to be equally suited to the position, and Moshe could sympathize with that. Rather than put Korach in his place, he reminded him that it wasn't Aaron of whom Korach was jealous, but Aaron's spiritual abilities that were given by God. So sometimes we see people who really act in ways that are inspiring to us, and we wish we could be like that. But when we're taking this as inspiration, then we can say, I could behave like this. I could work on developing these qualities that I like in somebody else. And maybe that's the whole reason that I know them and that I saw them, so that I could work on that for myself. So Moshe is basically saying, don't get angry with Aaron. Take it up with God who made Aaron what he is. So both Moshe and Aaron viewed their talents as God-given, and that's how they could show their talents and live with their talents without growing arrogant. They wouldn't become arrogant. So people don't have to hide their talents either. If we are given talents and gifts, we're meant to use them. And that's something we have to know, that we have to find ways to use the talents in the way that God wants. Humility is a gift also, and we could be recipients of that gift. And we're each talented at something, and when we excel, we receive compliments. And yet we know that we excelled because of God's gifts to us, and we recognize that what seems huge to another person maybe came easily to us because God gave us that gift. So this is not a reason to think highly of ourselves, but a reason to become humble. We can say thank you for the praise we receive, but we need to know that we don't deserve it. We have to remember that we're not better than the next person. If God had given the other person this talent, perhaps they could have accomplished much more. And just as Aaron used his gifts to serve God, so each of us can be a high priest, using the talents given to us to serve and glorify the one who gave them. That's a decision to use our talents to make God known into the world and serve God, and to keep recognizing that what we accomplish is something that God allows us to accomplish and gives us the correct tools for it. Now, this Parsha is teaching us good qualities that we can use for our own challenges. God places us in whatever position will be our opportunity to make the world better. In that place or situation, we have the ability to do the best that we can. We also try to improve our situation through work or prayer. Whatever efforts we make to utilize our gifts for serving God and making the world better, that's what we're here to do. Now, all of this, including our desire to improve our position, comes from God. The fact that we say, I did something good. I'm happy I did something good. You know what? If I did something good, I want to do more of this. God gave me this ability for a reason. I want to do more of it. So our everything is coming from God. Now, jealousy implies, because sometimes there are people who do something like what we do, only much better. Does that mean we're supposed to be jealous of them? No. We're supposed to learn from them, be inspired by them, and work on it. So jealousy implies that we don't recognize God as the source of our situation. When we know who placed us here, that takes away jealousy. When other people don't appreciate what we do, we can do our part to improve our own behavior if that's an option. But we also need to know that the way others behave toward us is something for them to improve. But from our perspective, everything comes from God and is part of what God is giving us, and is therefore nothing to be angry about. So knowing that everything comes from God changes how we look at ourselves as well as others. We could appreciate whatever God gives us, including our talents and good qualities. But there's nothing to be arrogant about because, again, it's a gift from God. So we do our best, but we can be humble. So we see that Moses didn't get angry at Korach or Dasan and Abiram because he knew that God placed them in the situation. It wasn't personal to him. He didn't have buttons or triggers. He knew that everything is coming from God. He did his best to help them grow, but when they didn't choose that, he understood that that was not in his power to make them grow. He understood that he had done his best, but everything was up to God. And when we do our best, then we can be humble. So with these qualities, we don't compare ourselves to others. We do our part, but we recognize who is the giver and the source of all of our blessings and opportunities. When we have that perspective, then we live with gratitude and with peace of mind. And we're able in those moments where whatever is going on, that we could just stop, take a breath, and recognize that God is here with us. So be blessed, and we should have just good news.